Water. Earth. Fire. Air. Long ago, the Avatar cartoons lived together in harmony. Then, everything changed when gritty studio executives attacked.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for them.
Only the original creators, masters of the ATLA franchise, could stop them. But when the live-action version needed them most, they f***ed off to make animated movies or something. Time passed, and fans discovered the new Avatar series, an adaptation on Netflix. And though its production values are great, it has a long way to go before it's ready to save anything. But I believe Netflix can save the franchise. Just not this season, because it kinda sucked. Well, it does and it doesn't. Admittedly, these people had a tough job. The cartoon they're adapting is a really damn high bar to clear. ATLA will go down as an all-time great in Western animation. It's that good. And God knows it doesn't translate to live action easily. And even if it did, I wouldn't exactly trust Netflix to do it. We all saw how Cowboy Bebop turned out, but their One Piece adaptation was surprisingly good, so who knows? And if you're going to attempt this at all, I definitely think a big budget series was the way to go, as opposed to a 2-hour movie that forces you to cut the story into something unrecognizable just to make your runtime. And in that sense, even though the odds were stacked against it, the makers of this show did have one thing going for them. That thing being that the last time somebody attempted this, we got the Shyamalan movie, so all Netflix Avatar had to do was be better than that thing, and we'd have something to work with here. And it is. I'll give them that much. Netflix Avatar is certainly better than the Shyamalan movie, but it's not great. It's not a disaster, it does some good things, but it gets at least as much wrong as it gets right. There are a number of reasons why this show ultimately didn't work for me, but it's really two main reasons that a lot of the other issues stem from. And I'll get into all that in a minute, but first let's talk about the stuff they did well. TV really is the best format to tackle this thing in. It just can't be done in a movie. The story is too big, and there's so much of it that's important that you can't really cut out if you want to get it right. Yeah, the cartoon would take a break from the main narrative sometimes so they could go off on a side quest or two, but even then you were still getting important character and nuance and world building that would factor in later. And since they had 8-hour-long episodes to do that this time, they could and do include a lot more of that stuff. I wouldn't say they did this very well, and there was still a lot they had to cut, but at least it was there. Also, with this extra time they have, it gave them the opportunity to add things that weren't in the cartoon, which had the potential to enhance the story in other ways. Unfortunately, most of the new stuff felt pretty awkward. There were a few good ideas though. We actually got to see the Airbender genocide instead of just hearing stories about it. That was a good addition. They introduced Azula much earlier so she could play a part in book 1. That was a good addition. There was a new plot about her secretly aiding Zhao in order to undermine Zuko, which I liked. That felt like something Azula would do. A lot of her other stuff frustrated me though, because they kind of rejiggered her character, for the worse in my opinion, but it's still a good thing that she's there. There was definitely an effort to make the characters actually look like they're supposed to look. I didn't notice any egregious race bending like in the movie. That was nice. Some of the cast I quite liked, and there are some weak links in there, but the clear standouts were Zuko and Sokka. Zuko because he seemed like the strongest actor of all the kid characters. Of course, it helps that his character arc was the one that got f***ed with the least. And Sokka because he had to be the most perfectly cast person out of anyone here. This guy's great. He looks like Sokka. His comedic timing was pretty good. He's even got the voice. He sounded just like Sokka's voice actor from the cartoon. Is he as funny as cartoon Sokka was? No, but that's because there's fewer jokes in this version. That said, this dude is as close to cartoon Sokka as we were ever gonna get. The bending was realized very well. In the movie, it just looked unintentionally funny. Here, it's really slick. They paid attention to certain moves corresponding to certain bending techniques, and they make sure to keep martial arts as an important part of it. Bending is cool and fun again like it's supposed to be. No complaints about that. And generally, the show looks good. There's a lot of money on the screen. Production values are pretty solid, though they are spotty at times. There are some laughably bad green screen shots, and not even complicated ones either. Like they'll green screen 3 dudes just standing in front of a house, and it looks like garbage. And there's quite a few shots like that too. But the stuff that you'd think would be super difficult to pull off was really damn good. Like the ocean spirit kaiju looked fantastic. That's the best effect in the whole show. They must have saved like half their budget for that one sequence, and it's fucking stunning. Also, the cityscapes of Omashu and the Northern Water Tribe looked great. CG Appa and Momo were better than I thought they'd be. You can see where they had to cut corners in some places, but the stuff they chose to spend money on looks like it was worth the money. So don't take this video to mean the show is irredeemable. There is good stuff here. Unfortunately, the stuff they got wrong kind of overpowers it. And that segues us into the problems with the show, and I need to build up to those two big reasons, so let's do the small stuff first. I wasn't wild about the costumes. They do look pretty accurate to the cartoon from what I remember, but either they skimped on them or this was a case of these things just not translating well to live action. A lot of these things just look like cosplay, to the point where it's hard to take them seriously, and sadly, Ozai was one of the biggest victims of this. I think Daniel Day Kim is a good choice for Ozai, at least in the Western talent pool, but that costume is straight up goofy looking. I don't care how cartoon accurate it is, in live action it doesn't work. And that happens with more than a few characters, usually the adults. Also, the acting is mixed. As good as the Zuko and Sokka actors are, not everybody fares so well. I'll be nice to the kid playing Aang because that's such a fucking demanding role for a young actor. It might not even be possible to really nail this one in live action. Overall, I'd say he was fine. For what he needs to do, he does an admirable job. His physicality is pretty good. He can emote decently. His acting is not the worst. He's better than the kid from the movie was. There is an issue with the performance, the same issue a lot of the actors have. I'll get to it, but it's not because of his acting. With Iroh, I hate to say it, but I think this guy was miscast. He's one of the more likable people here, but his vibe is all wrong. Iroh, to me, should feel like an eccentric Mr. Miyagi. Kind of silly and lovable, a little mysterious, but has a tragic past that he keeps to himself and could your shit up really easily if you cross him. And I just never saw Uncle Iroh in this dude. The gravitas just wasn't there. His acting wasn't really bad, but he felt more like a friendly uncle on a sitcom or something. And Azula's the same way, though in her case it's more obvious because she's probably the main character that's been changed the most for this new version, and I don't like the changes at all. Azula in the cartoon is a fucking amazing villain. Not only is she a terrifying bending prodigy, but she's sadistic, manipulative, tactically brilliant, and a borderline psychopath. She can think circles around grown-ass adults and manipulate them into doing what she wants. She can kick your ass with her bending, but a lot of the time she doesn't even need to because she's been 5 steps ahead of you the whole time and you didn't even realize it until it was too late. In fact, she's so dangerous that she's never really technically defeated. Not one-on-one anyway. Her downfall comes because she's so cruel that her friends turn against her and she doesn't trust anyone, which makes her paranoid, which causes her to become really unstable, and that throws her off her game, which is how Zuko ultimately one-ups her. By comparison, this new Azula is just really lame. She feels more like a high school bully or something. She doesn't seem nearly as cunning or dangerous. They've changed her personality to make her more insecure and desperate for Ozai's approval, and there's this new subplot with Ozai using Zuko's mission to motivate Azula and him playing them against each other, and that's not right. Azula shouldn't need that for motivation, and it shouldn't be this easy for anyone, even Ozai, to get under her skin. At least not until book 3. And no, I didn't like the actress. But I can't really blame her that much because the way they portrayed the character in general just felt wrong to me, minus the subplot with Zhao. But for my money, the one who gets it the worst is Katara. And it's hard to tell if this actress can even play a good Katara because that's not what this is. Katara's supposed to be the mother figure of Team Avatar, and that's kind of still there, but she's got a lot of layers. She has a fiery temper, she can be really stubborn when she thinks she's right about something, she can get combative, indignant, and even downright mean on occasion, and she's so desperate to learn waterbending that it causes her to make bad, irrational decisions sometimes that get her and her friends in trouble. That's in the cartoon. In this version, all that stuff is gone. This new Katara is too nice, too calm, too passive. She very rarely loses her temper, and when she does, it comes off more like her just being annoyed than full-blown anger. She never really loses her shit at all. Frankly, Katara's boring now. It's as if they took her personality from the cartoon, which was very interesting and flawed and complex, and dialed it back to about a 5. And I think that's the best way to sum up all the issues with the acting here. Most of the performances aren't necessarily bad, but everybody feels like a watered-down version of what they should be. The characters' personalities, which were very dynamic in the cartoon, are all reined in here, and I don't understand why. Aang's playfulness is kind of there. They show that he likes to have fun and goof off a little bit, but generally he's a lot more serious than you'd think and accepts the responsibility of being the Avatar a lot quicker than he should. Zuko's anger is kind of there, but he comes off as way more mellow than he should be. Iroh's love of tea is still there, but his eccentric personality is just gone, and it's like that for pretty much everybody. So maybe these actors could play more accurate versions of these characters, but those aren't the versions we get. So if, like me, you weren't really digging the performances here, that's not a failure of acting, it's a failure of writing. Speaking of... even with 8 hours, there's a lot they had to cut out. They're still trying to follow the narrative of the cartoon, but so much of it feels truncated in a pretty clumsy way. There are a few stories they do well with. Zuko saving Aang as the Blue Spirit, Aang going to the Fire Nation temple to talk to Roku, those were pretty good. But they also take 4 or 5 episodes of the cartoon and cram them all into the Omashu plot. None of them have the impact they should. It's just too damn crowded, and none of it gets to breathe because we're only getting bits and pieces of each story. Katara finds out that Jet's a jerk 30 seconds after she argues with Sokka about it, and nothing bad happens because she trusted him because they didn't have time for that. Zuko and Iroh hire June to track down Aang. She tracks him down in a way that makes no sense at all if you think about it, and then she just leaves. And that's it. It's nothing but a plot device. She appears in like 3 scenes. There's no story there. It's just an event that happens because it happened in the cartoon. Then they had to hurry up and get it over with so they could move on to the next event. So the stories from the cartoon are in there, but they kind of suck now. The few they take the time to focus on turn out better, but most of them don't get that treatment. And what makes it weirder is that the writers also try to add some new stuff, which doesn't have to be a bad thing if you're smart about it, but the stuff they added isn't nearly as compelling as the stuff they took out. One new addition is this subplot of Aang's past lives telling him that he needs to bear this burden alone and shouldn't involve his friends in this shit because reasons. And this we get instead of the story where Aang hides the letter from Sokka and Katara's dad because he was afraid they'd leave him if they got it, and then they got really upset with him and almost left him but then didn't. This new plot tries to cover the same ground, but without the emotional component. It doesn't hit the same because it sounds really flimsy on the face of it, and the show has already proven to us that Aang is better off with his friends than without them. You never buy into it because it's just the other avatars telling Aang stuff instead of us being shown why this should be a thing. Here, they just exposit some shit to us, while the story in the cartoon was born out of Aang's insecurity and fear of being alone, which really made you feel for Aang even though he did a bad thing and affirmed the friendship between these three, something this new show never really manages. And I think that's a good place to get into the 2 main issues that drag this show down more than anything. All that other stuff definitely hurts, but so much of it is just a symptom of these 2 things: story and character. And they're really a package deal because each one directly influences the other. Now, the original cartoon was very character driven. A lot of the stories in it could only happen because the characterizations were so strong. Like when Katara stole the waterbending scroll, which got them into trouble with pirates and set other events in motion as well. You get that story because Katara was so obsessed with learning waterbending that she threw caution to the wind and took a stupid risk that there were consequences for. You get that story because Katara was a deep character, and a lot of the stories in the show were like that. But now, since the character in these people has been so watered down, stuff like that can't happen anymore. So much of the character from the cartoon is gone, but since a lot of the character-driven plots still need to happen, they don't feel organic, and either they just awkwardly drop into the characters' laps, or they happen more or less the same way as in the cartoon, except They're f***ing boring now. Example, Aang doesn't get free of the iceberg when Katara gets so pissed off at Sokka for acting like a douche that she waterbended a crack in it because new Sokka is a lot less douchey and new Katara doesn't get pissed off anymore. So now they find the iceberg and Aang just frees himself, which begs the question why the hell he didn't do that 100 years ago, but whatever. Katara doesn't steal the waterbending scroll. Now Gran just had the scroll all along and put the damn thing in Katara's pack for her to find, so the whole story that resulted from that is just gone. And there's a lot of other examples like that I could name, but in my opinion, the biggest offender here, the biggest problem with the story and these characters, is that there's no sexism. That may have come out wrong, but just go with me for a second. In the cartoon, in book 1, there was a theme, a through line of various characters being sexist. Not in a mean-spirited way, really, it was a cultural thing. The Water Tribe had traditional gender roles, the men were the warriors, and the women took care of the kids and did the laundry and stuff. Then when the adult men went off to fight in the war, leaving Sokka behind because he was too young, he thought it was his job to be the man of the tribe. He grew up with that stuff in his head, and it caused him to become a little sexist when we meet him. But that goes away pretty early on once Sokka meets the Kyoshi warriors. He thinks, oh damn, these girls are badass, Suki's a better fighter than I am, maybe I've had the wrong idea about this stuff. So Sokka humbles himself, he asks Suki to train him, and he has a learning experience. Then later on when they get to the Northern Water Tribe, which is all about the restrictive gender roles, men are fighters, women are healers, they even do arranged marriages and stuff, but now Sokka's grown up and he's realized that these things are not good things. So then when he supports Katara when Pakku refuses to train her because she's a girl, it means something. And it affects more stories than just that. Sokka ditching the sexism and the cockiness is what made Suki realize that he was actually a good guy, and that was the beginning of their romance, and it made the later relationship with Yue more interesting too. The gender roles were why Pakku was such a dick at first because he got his heart broken by Gran ditching their arranged marriage and he never got over it, and it's what made Katara so pissed off that she just had to challenge the asshole to a fight, which led to a lot of stories and a lot of character growth for all these people. But if you take that stuff away while still keeping the events that were caused by it, it all just feels empty. Sokka doesn't have any sexist beliefs to overcome. Suki doesn't need to realize that he's a better person than she thought when she met him. Now they just start sparring and eye-f***ing because they're hot for each other. There's no arranged marriage for Yue to get past because she just called that thing off herself years before we meet her, and the guy she was betrothed to is actually a good guy now, so Sokka doesn't have to be rivals with him. Pakku is still sexist, but not because of the story with Gran. That's not even a thing anymore. It's just because that's the way things have always been in the Water Tribe. And Sokka never had any of that character growth, so when he tells Katara, go kick Pakku's ass, it doesn't mean anything. It's just a bunch of empty lines that fall flat because I guess an arc about characters learning that sexism is bad isn't PC anymore, unlike a genocide, which somehow is PC now. You figure it out. And that hurts Katara too, because once you've taken away the story and you've dialed back her personality and her temper, the big fight with her and Pakku just becomes f***ing dull. And it's actually a pretty damn good recreation of their fight from the cartoon. Even the choreography is the same. But in the cartoon, that fight was really emotionally charged because it had all that stuff motivating it. There's no emotion to it now, it's just a bunch of moves with nothing behind them. Yeah, technically it is the same fight, but without the story and the character to give it any weight. They did the fight really well, but they completely forgot why it mattered. And it's all f***ing meaningless anyway, because in the end, Katara doesn't even need Pakku to train her. She somehow becomes a completely self-taught master because, God forbid, she need to learn anything from a man, even a man who needed to learn something from her first, which I would argue is a hell of a lot more sexist than all the stuff the writers cut out of this story. Isn't that f***ing ironic? So Pakku isn't really a character anymore, just a vehicle for the writers to inject some really half-baked feminism.
Support feminists. Hairy women need love too.
Which was more empowering and and more nuanced the way it was done in the kids' cartoon from nearly 20 years ago, and build up to their very own version of that scene from Avengers Endgame, which is every bit as lame and cringy as it was in that movie. Do you see what I'm getting at here? You take away the character, and suddenly the story sucks. The removal of that one thing caused a ripple effect that pretty much ruined a lot of really good stuff from book one. I don't know why they thought it would be better like this, but in trying to make the show less problematic, all they really did was make it less interesting. And that was just one example. If you add all the other ones too, you'd be surprised how quickly this whole thing starts to fall apart. I was on the fence about this show when I started this review, but the more I think about it, the more I think Netflix really screwed up here. It's definitely a step up from the Shyamalan movie, though the lack of penis hair was disappointing. What are we supposed to make memes about now? But it has its own issues, and there are a lot of them. Most of the characters feel like sterile, bland versions of what they should be. It does follow many of the events of book one, but with so much of the character drained out, the stories mined from those events don't hit nearly as hard, and in some cases not at all. Aang can fly without the glider, but still uses the glider to fly? Why? I don't f***ing know. And it's so weird to me that the writers seem to want to go darker and more serious than the cartoon did, while at the same time dumbing down the writing to the point that it felt less intelligent, less thoughtful, and less mature than the cartoon ever was. With a few exceptions, the production values are really impressive. I like some of the actors, and there's just enough good here to make me think the writers were trying to do right by this property, but just couldn't get out of their own way. I don't think it's so bad that they couldn't course correct in season 2, but I wouldn't bet money on that happening either. Netflix Avatar may not be a total train wreck, but it wasn't what it needed to be, and I think the writing's on the wall here. Animation is clearly the medium where this IP shines the brightest, so in the future, maybe they should just stick with that. Thanks for watching. Sorry I rambled for so long. I don't know how long this video will end up being, but it feels like it's gone for a while. While you're still here, ding that bell icon and follow my social media so you can always be notified when I upload new stuff. The links are down there. And be sure to do all the other YouTube things. Hit that like button, share the video, subscribe if you haven't already, and make sure you're still subscribed. According to my analytics, something like 100 people got unsubscribed recently, so that happens more than you'd think. That's all for now. I'll be back with more soon. Take care, stay tuned. I'll see you next time.